Hi, in today's lesson we're going to look at relative pronouns. Relative pronouns introduce relative clauses, and the most common relative pronouns are who, whom, whose, which and that. And in informal situations, when, where and why can act as relative pronouns. The relative pronoun we use depends on what we're referring to and the type of relative clause. Let's remind ourselves of the difference between defining and non-defining relative clauses. A defining relative clause gives us essential information to tell us which person or thing the speaker is talking about. For example, it took me a while to get used to people who eat popcorn during the movie. This is essential information to know which people we are referring to. So it's a defining relative clause. Whereas a non-defining relative clause gives us extra information. For example, the science fair, which lasted all day, ended with an awards ceremony. The fact that the science fair lasted all day is just giving us extra information. So let's look at the relative pronouns in more detail. Who is used for people and sometimes pet animals and can be used in both defining and non-defining relative clauses. For example, she's the singer who I heard on the radio. Who is referring to the singer. It's giving us essential information to know who we are referring to and therefore is a defining relative clause. For the relative pronouns who, whom, which and that, the relative pronoun can be omitted if it's in a defining relative clause and the object of the clause. So here it's a defining relative clause and the singer is the object of the clause. So we can say, she's the singer I heard on the radio. We can omit the relative pronoun. Okay, which is used for animals and things and can be used in both defining and non-defining relative clauses, referring to a whole sentence. For example, we drove past my old house, which is being renovated at the moment. The relative pronoun which is referring to my old house. It's a non-defining relative clause because it's adding extra information. Here, which cannot be omitted because it's a non-defining relative clause. So let's look at one where we can omit the relative pronoun. Here is another example with which. Chinese is a language which I found hard to learn. As this is a defining relative clause and it's the object of the clause, we can omit the relative pronoun and say, Chinese is a language I've found hard to learn. We use that instead of who, whom or which in relative clauses to refer to people, animals and things. We use it to introduce defining clauses only, and it's more informal than who, whom or which. For example, she went to the school that my mother went to. Or that can be omitted as it's the defining relative clause and the object of the clause. So you could say, she went to the school my mother went to. Whose has a possessive meaning and is usually used for people and animals and sometimes things in a formal situation. Whose can be used in defining and non-defining relative clauses. For example, the head teacher, whose name changed from Smith to Brown, is an inspiration to the students. Here, this clause is giving us extra information and is therefore a non-defining relative clause. And finally, whom. Whom is used in a formal context or in writing, and often with a preposition. It is rarely used in spoken English, where it is often replaced with who if who is the object. For example, the parents whom we met were all involved in organising the school fete. Or whom can be omitted as it's a defining relative clause and the object of the clause. So you could say the parents we met were all involved in organising the school fete. Or the parents who we met were involved in organising the school fete. So remember, only which, who, whom and that can be left out in defining relative clauses if it's the object of the clause. In informal English, we often use where, when or why to introduce defining relative clauses instead of at which, on which or for which. So where is used for places. For example, I know a restaurant where the food is excellent, instead of at which the food is excellent. When is used for times. For example, there isn't a day when I don't think about you, instead of there isn't a day on which I don't think about you. Why is used for reasons. For example, do you know the reason why the restaurant is closed today? Instead of the reason for which the restaurant is closed today. So now let's look at some common errors. We can't use that instead of who, whom or which in non-defining relative clauses. So, for example, we say, it gives me a good chance to improve my Spanish, which has become a little rusty. And the fact that your Spanish has become a little rusty is extra information, so it's a non-defining relative clause, and there we can't replace which with that. So we can't say, it gives me a good chance to improve my Spanish, that has become a little rusty. We don't use what as a relative pronoun, so he can make himself easily understood in the two languages, which helps a lot. Not so he can make himself easily understood in the two languages, what helps a lot. You can't say that. We don't use who for things. For example, she's written some great children's books which have got lots of colourful pictures in. We can't say she's written some great children's books who have got colourful pictures in. Also, finally, take care to spell which correctly, and I often see it spelled W-I-C-H. So remember, it's W-H-I-C-H. So now it's your turn. Fill the gap with the correct relative pronoun. Number 1, politics is a subject blank I've never understood. You could use which, that or no pronoun as it's a defining relative clause giving essential information and is the object of the clause. 2, I want a television blank has high definition. Which or that. Here you cannot omit the relative pronoun. The television is not the object of the clause but the subject. 3, Ronaldo is the footballer blank scored the winning goal. Who or that. It's a defining relative clause referring to a person, so we use who or that. We cannot omit the pronoun as Ronaldo is the subject of the clause and not the object. 4. This is Mr. and Mrs. Smith, blank, children I teach. Whose. Here it's a possessive pronoun referring to people, so we use whose. 5. The man, blank, I marry will have to be someone really special. Write your answers down below and I promise to give you feedback on your answer. Remember, there may be more than one correct answer. And tell me why you choose your answer. It's really good to understand why you're choosing which relative pronoun. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you feel more confident using relative pronouns. Remember to like this video if you found it useful and share it with your friends and colleagues learning English. And please subscribe so you don't miss out on any new lessons, and click the bell so you get notified when any new lessons come out. Check out these videos here or here, I'm not sure which way they are, and there's one on defining and non-defining relative clauses, so could be very useful. Take care and see you very soon. Bye bye.